What's going on, boys? Thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers, subscribe to our Patreon free to stay in the loop, arm yourselves, life stuff. Quick Patreon update while we're here. Available to all members, including free members, especially free members actually. I'm going to start posting my daily notes slash informal journaling. Just about every day I will record thoughts that come to my mind that either I could make a video on or include in a video and or to engrave in my head. Because I find whenever I write ideas down, even if I never review the notes, I am more inclined to remember these ideas even if it's on an unconscious level. The first one is available right now. The second one will be available soon after this video goes up. No email notifications per post or anything like that. I don't want to bug people, but I do want to make this available to people who might be interested. So today we're talking about anxiety in general and my situation in relation to anxiety. Anxiety is weird because on an emotional level, anxiety about something bad happening is worse than something bad happening. And I think that's because you don't have the information you need to brace or act correctly. Even if you have taken measures to deal with any number of bad situations, your anxiety comes from not knowing what you're dealing with. And you're terrified the option you'll need to brace for is the worst one, but you don't know. So even as you are bracing for what you think the worst thing that could happen is, there's this dread you are bracing for the wrong thing. Or there's this dread that your preparations are not good enough. Or there's dread because you haven't made any preparations and you don't know what you're supposed to be bracing for. However, if you knew for certain that this worst case is for sure the thing that's going to happen, you can at least relax a little bit. Because if nothing else, you know, and you can start wrapping your mind around it. So the situation I'm in is I don't know for sure what's going to happen or why, but I know it's not going to be anything good, and it's going to be very bad. My father told me I need to set aside time after Christmas because we need to have a serious talk. And usually that precedes homelessness threats, or some other kind of big confrontation or issue that will necessitate my changing the way I do things. And that's always upsetting, but it's the way it's been deployed this time that is the most anxiety-inducing. And hurtful, frankly. I have some time off, and I've been using this time both to rest and to organize things. And he deployed this maneuver this way because he knew that would destroy my ability to relax or concentrate during this off time. Instead of doing it right then, and in addition, dragging it out. I'm sure until the day I go back to the office. And this all reminds me of my legal experience. When I first got arrested and charged and saw the way things worked, in my mind, I was fucked. There was, this was it. This was my life now. So while I'm in a cell, as bad as that feels, as devastating as that feels, I am immediately starting to wrap my mind around the idea of being in prison for a long time. And there aren't words for how bad that is, but the worst feelings came during the unfolding of the case, because that's when hope enters the mix. You would think this situation in which your fate is not sealed would feel better than the situation in which you think your fate is sealed, but it's not. The waiting, the uncertainty, the anxiety is so much worse. And he knows that because I told him, and that's probably what this entire strategy is, to make me feel as bad as possible. And this anxiety period is not as intense, obviously, because going to prison isn't guaranteed, but vagrancy laws are brutal, so that is in the back of the mind. But I'm also not as bumbling and incapable, naive as I was. So I've had some time to think about situations like these. What do you do when all you can do is wait and fear? Well, I think the first thing to remember, not that it's any solace or consolation at first, is you are always living in uncertainty and terror, even if you don't realize it. You can't view these moments as getting hit with a projectile, as in, this one knot of bad circumstances has flown through the air and knocked you in the head, because that's not what's happening. You should look at it more as the water is rising. You went from standing on dry land to now up to your knees in water. The water, or the bad terror and uncertainty, were always there, and even if the water recedes, that uncertainty and terror are still going to be there. What you're finding yourself in is a reminder of the situation you are always in. Just because you are not feeling it right now doesn't mean it's there, waiting to rise up and engulf you. Now, again, that doesn't feel better or make you feel better at first, but it does begin to train a mindset. And that mindset is stress tolerance. You aren't training to keep cool, keep your head during a series of situations. You are training to keep your head and keep cool during the great situation of your existence. Uncertainty and terror. However, even if you've trained your stress tolerance, which I have a little bit, but I know not to the level I need it, you'll still get shaken up when you are reminded of the great situation. It's not a pretty, pleasant thing. It's not a thing you can deal with because you are going to die one day. So, what is an easy measure for dealing with these painful, terrifying reminders when you get shaken up inevitably? Keeping emergency plan lists is a good idea. And you shouldn't write them with the idea that these lists are going to solve or can solve any of these terrible situations. They can't. And if you go into it with that mindset, reality is going to spit on your face and hit you in the head with a bat. Your goal is to automate a physical or material response. So you write your lists, you memorize some of them, maybe you recite them to yourself, and they are step-by-step guides for actions you need to take when X situation happens. And you do this so even when you are shaken up and out of your mind with anxiety, you have steps you can take that will make things better even a little bit. Things you don't need to think about or to plan around. Things you can just do. Because at first, you won't be able to think or to plan. You'll be occupied solely with your terror, with your anxiety. So with these lists, you'll start deploying your own measures automatically, which is good, but you're also creating room for yourself to get your shit together, to get your head back on straight. It's hard to contend with an emotion when you are trying to think about actions but the longer you leave that emotion unacknowledged, untended, the worse you're going to be able to perform actions. Now, I don't know, I don't think you'll ever be able to resolve these emotions until this situation is dealt with, but even having that little bit of space and time to emotionalize will put a band aid on it and let you think and plan a little bit better. And that's invaluable. And a method like this is a lot better to me than doing things explicitly to try to cheer yourself up. Doing things to cheer yourself up doesn't work for me. I don't feel any better, and in fact, I feel worse because it's transparent what I'm doing. I feel bad because of these problems. Trying to do anything except address them makes me feel even more acutely aware of those problems and some kind of negative feeling with myself because I know what I'm doing. It feels like surrendering to an opponent who is not going to accept your surrender. So by surrendering, all you're doing is giving them even more power over you. And powerlessness is a huge component in this sort of uncertainty, terror, dread, anxiety. Taking measures to address the problems doesn't make you feel better, but it contributes to helping you stop spiraling into feeling even worse. And when you can automate these steps, you give yourself that time to feel what you're feeling. Now, my situation is screwy because I knew it wasn't good, but I thought I was moving in a good direction, or this whole family situation was moving in a better direction. Something my father told me that always stuck with me, and I'm finding has been informing the way I've been developing, is if he died, my mother and I would be in deep shit, but if we died, he would be fine because he's a survivor and that's who he is and what he is. And that was hurtful, but it hurt badly because it was true. So, for the last however many years, I've been cultivating spirit or mindset. What sort of person do you need to be a proper survivor? And taking it a step further, what sort of a person do you need to be that kind of survivor while also being able to care for the people around you? When everything goes to shit, what kind of a person do you need to take care of yourself, take care of the people around you, and keep it going? You know, not doing this for a little while, but let's imagine the entire world goes apocalypse mode. What sort of core do you need to keep that up forever? Well, I'm finding the first thing is you need to figure out how to manage your emotions. If you try to repress them, they will destroy you. And in addition to that, even if you were able to delete your emotions, you wouldn't want to. They are here to help you. That's why you have them. You're a member of an apex predator species that has evolved for millions of years to be exactly what you are right now. That's one of the reasons I don't think I've ever talked about it in a video. I've wanted to make videos about it. But the idea that a baseline human is superior to all other sorts of human. People put psychopaths on a pedestal, but they don't have access to the tools you do. Removing senses, emotions, might make you more effective in select situations, but that's like throwing away a wrench because it's heavy. I don't think the emotions answer is to get rid of the wrench, it's to figure out how to carry it well. Because at some point, you will need it. You evolved into it for a reason. And for survivorship, I think the goal is to work with your emotions and get them to a point they're more like voices in your ear rather than madmen who will grab the wheel away from you at bad moments. And to an extent, I think that is possible. And I think you accomplish that by satisfying these emotions' needs, but doing it in a way that is suited to your goals or your situation. Let's use sympathy as an example. When you have sympathy but it's undeveloped, you are at the mercy of other people's bad situations and their feelings. If you try to shut that sympathy off, you're repressing it, it'll destroy you. However, if you roll over and let sympathy do whatever it wants, either you'll be a sucker because people will use you, or you won't be able to function because you are bearing another person's emotions in addition to your own, with no way to do anything about it, for you or for them. So instead, you work with your sympathy and develop it. You're willing to help people up to this point. If you get screwed or destroyed by that point, then you adjust your placement of the point. And you do this until you develop a sense of how much you should help people. And in the process of doing this, you also develop a familiarity with people who play on your sympathy, either intentionally or unintentionally. And in doing so, you learn people better and develop an even finer sense of your sympathy, or how much to sympathize, when to sympathize. And in this way, it might not feel perfectly satisfying to your feeling of sympathy at first, but again, it's like you're training it, like an animal, or developing a working relationship with a person. They trust that you'll work to satisfy their needs, and they'll therefore learn to accept when they can't get their way. They know they're not getting their way this time, not because you're a piece of shit or because you're trying to repress and disable them, but instead because, for whatever reason, now is not the time. And you've built enough trust with them, built enough of a relationship, they have seen you at work enough, they trust you when you say that, not that you're actually saying it. They know you'll make efforts to do what they want when the time is appropriate. And I think you can do this with all your emotions. The difficulty is discomfort. Because to develop these relationships, you need to limit traditionally positive emotions, and you need to engage at all with traditionally negative emotions. And with an emotion like true fear like this, who wants to put themselves in situations they're not getting scared for fun, like a horror movie or a haunted house or something, but putting themselves in situations they are actually terrified because there are actual stakes? And furthermore, how do you train an emotion like fear? Well, that leads us into another component to this survivor mentality. We mentioned stress tolerance earlier. I think there's another way to look at situations like these that will help build this mindset. It's hacky to say you need to look at bad situations as learning opportunities, and that kind of advice always feels bad because the fear is, what if this is not a learning opportunity? What if maybe you do learn something here, but the consequence of this situation is you'll never get to apply what you've learned? But realistically, what other option do you have? Let's say you learn nothing from this situation and then everything turns out okay, you land on your feet. Well, you went through all that for nothing because you didn't learn the lessons, you didn't internalize them. And then what if you do learn something, but it turns out terribly and you do end up in a situation or end up dead, and you it doesn't matter that you learned anything because it turned out poorly. Well, in that case, it doesn't matter. But this doesn't matter shouldn't be your focus or what you are planning around, because if we're operating under the assumption you are not right now tunneling through your skull, then the actual assumption is you want to get out of this and you want to improve your situation. And when I say the sort of bad that you can't plan around, I'm specifically talking about life in prison or sentenced to death or death. You should be planning around the absolute worst, but either of those scenarios are so bad, I think you need an entirely different set of skills. Everything we're talking about right now, I'm not sure any of it applies to life in prison or death. You should be planning around the worst of the worst case scenarios, but those two are so bad, I don't even know if it's possible to plan for them on this level, or if there's anything we can do on this side that would make any difference. Now, I'm probably wrong about that, and I'll pay for it one day, but if I have to pay for it, then none of this is going to matter anyway, which is what I'm saying. Therefore, you take these bad situations, not the utter worst, let's say worst case scenario that is not the worst case scenario, and you take measures to learn every single thing you can. And you be thankful you're in a situation you can learn something, and you're at least learning it this early, however early this early is. And you take comfort in the fact these situations both give you stories that you can enjoy and also build your legend. We talk sometimes about the power your lore has in your life. Your life story is a tool, and the better your tool is, the better a tool you have to use in other situations. In my case, my terrible feelings, experiences, are good content. And the lessons I learn dealing with them makes me better at navigating the world just by having this selection of stories. So if you are alive and free at the end of your trauma, understand that in return for wounds, you are receiving weapons. And there are many more components to this survivor mindset, but let's dip back into my situation for a bit. Part of the reason I am trying to develop this mindset is I want to be able to care for my family or anybody who needs me when shit gets bad. Because when shit gets bad, it's the Warhammer Fantasy Total War series is a great set of games for learning lessons. I think it was Legends of Total War said it. Great thing, he said. You need to understand the AI in this game is not trying to give you a good experience. It is trying to kill you. And that's important for real life because that's the way real life operates. These situations, these people are trying to hurt you. You cannot expect your enemies or your enemy, life, reality, to play nice with you or to follow any particular set of rules. Reality is trying to kill you. And that's bad enough for one person. What happens when more people become your responsibility? You need to be able to figure out how to fight life, not just to preserve yourself, but to preserve others. And that's difficult. And in addition to everything else life can throw at you, I am trying to prepare for my father's health issues. They're coming. Everyone was dismissive and angry at me 2 or 3 years ago when I said something was going to happen, and then what happened? Health issue happened. Near-death health issue happened. Now, in my gut, I don't feel a flare up like that happening again. Instead, I feel a series of descending stumbles. We're looking at diabetes, dementia, heart issues, and cancer. Diabetes already had its first flare up. And while things health wise have returned somewhat to normal, that was one stumble. While the health issue is a bit better, it's never going to be back at that level. That is a permanent consequence. Diabetes is now a larger factor in life. Alzheimer's. My father's always had memory issues, but when I was younger, these were things you could chalk up to forgetfulness. Not so easy to chalk up to forgetfulness is forgetting a 30 to 40-minute conversation about important things that need to happen in the same day, among other things. Now, that doesn't happen often, but it's serious, and the among other things are serious too. And when it rains, it pours, and the human body seems to operate like a car. You start with one small electrical issue, and then in a month, all the electronics in your car are acting wacky. And it started to affect mechanical shit too. So, what happens if one or the other, Alzheimer's or diabetes, has another flare up and they start feeding on each other? Or what happens if cancer pops up or a heart issue pops up? And of course, these are the four you're thinking about. What happens when the thing you aren't thinking about happens? But in any case, they're going to start feeding on each other and dragging one's ability to live down to nothing. Or, in other words, I don't think there's going to be a flare up that just outright kills him. I'm most afraid of a long decline. And on some level, he seems to be aware of this too. He used to never talk about death. In the last year, more than 5 times, he's given me the "you'll be sorry when I'm gone" speech. And he's trying to take better care of his health in ways I don't normally see. So even if something isn't wrong right now, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one feeling what's probably going to happen. So, on his side, I'm concerned both for him and for anyone who's going to have to deal with him, which is going to be me. God forbid if it's somebody else. In this family, we've already seen what happens when an aggressive person gets Alzheimer's. My paternal grandfather, whom we talk about sometimes, got Alzheimer's. They put him in an assisted living facility, and there were a lot of black attendants. So, fucking brain melty goes around calling everybody the N-word, which some people might think is based, other people might think is tragic. Some people would think that's really, really dangerous, and thank God nothing happened. He got evicted before something could happen. One of the reasons in my grand life plan an inheritance isn't really part of that is I know there's going to be a lot of intensive care involved. I know that's going to be expensive. And I am expecting to incur a lot of debt. But then my mother is another part of this equation. She's always tried to make good health decisions, and for that reason, my gut thinks she's going to die abruptly. In some way that makes it clear that none of these health concerns or health conscious decisions made any difference, because that's how things go. But let's suppose she is alive to experience this decline of her husband. In or for normal situations, even trying situations, she has a high stress tolerance. However, there are two issues here. One, she conducts her emotions the way a toddler conducts shitting itself. Everything seems fine. There is no communication that anything is wrong. Then she disappears for a little while, comes back, still acts like nothing is wrong, except now she stinks. She's had a breakdown in private, and there's no way to help her because she wants to act like nothing has happened or nothing can be done. And then, if this keeps up, like another set of cascades, it will cascade until we are at the point ballistic skull drilling is on the menu, even if it's not being discussed, and that is not something you want. Her paternal grandfather killed himself. I have fun coming up with different ways, creative ways of saying shooting yourself. Maybe this just runs in the family. And then, two, she does not have a high stress tolerance when it comes to family stuff. She'll break down totally. Miserable, destroyed emotionally, and unable to do anything. So, supposing she lives to see this decline, my goal with her is to bear as much of that burden as possible while also instilling as much confidence as possible in her, so that even though things are getting worse or getting bad, she doesn't have to suffer all of it. And part of gearing up to deal with something like that, on one hand, involves developing that survivor mindset, becoming a harder person, but also being less human with my father and expecting less humanity in return, which I'm sure is a component to why this situation is happening, but it's also probably why I'm not breaking down right now. This is what I've been this is what I've been training for. Not just trying to deal with someone who despises you, but also keep your cool and make life better for them, regardless of how they act or how you feel. Now, to be fair, I am counting on Alzheimer's and other health issues to dull that blade a bit and make the situation easier to swallow, because at that point, you can't blame what they're doing on them because they're fucked up health-wise. But even if this situation turns into homelessness, for me, it is good training once we get to that stage. Because I still haven't worked out how to deal with people amicably and productively who do not want to solve a problem or are trying to make it worse actively. I don't know what in particular I've done to set this situation off, because he won't tell me, but he also won't let me try to make amends. So I have to try to figure out what the problem is, and then try to figure out a solution for it with someone who does not want a solution. But there must be a way to do it, because with black blood in your veins and magic in your stomach, anything is possible. But this thing is what has me the most confused. Even before this, whenever I would try to come up with solutions to problems, it would create anger. So in this problem-solving mindset, or trying to make things work mindset, trying to gear up for what's coming mindset, I am prepared to work towards solutions that are not ideal and whose consequences become just more problems. My father doesn't like it when I have an opinion about things. We agree on almost nothing. And when I was younger, my quotes solution was to be upset about that, or to feel hurt by it, to resent it. My solution now has been not to have an opinion. Consequently, that leads to less speaking from my part, because I'm trying not to say anything with any sort of opinion tone that will create anger. But that turns into you don't talk enough, or you don't have enough conversations with me. I'm forced to deploy flawed fixes that will turn into more problems later. Or I haven't figured out a way to work out fixes that will work but don't come to me naturally. Another example. I work part time, but I'm staying with that job so I can develop the experience I've developed, thank God. And also because I don't see that organization surviving forever or even that much longer. So I want to stick with them to the end because for the most part they've been good to me. I'm trying to be a good person here. And in addition, I'm spending a lot of my free time trying to diversify my income streams. But my father hates everything I do and doesn't like any of it or acknowledge any of it or approve of any of it. He wants me to quit my executive director job so I can become a retail shelf stalker, which in terms of money around here is going to pay the about the exact same if I'm doing this one part-time and the other one full-time. It's close, but they're rather even in terms of income. And one is valuable and the other isn't, but because one is part-time, that makes me a bastard and lazy and all this. Tarot is the devil. Typology is for retards. Nobody wants to buy knickknacks online. So he wants help with a lot of projects. And I am perfectly happy to help with projects. I've been helping with projects my entire life. However, I'm working on 2 careers with odd hours, and while dropping everything to come help with a project is another thing I'm willing to do. I can't help, one, if I'm not asked for help, and two, I can't stay on call 24/7 because it's never scheduled, this help. And trying to schedule it became a huge argument earlier this year. So when he needs help or wants help right now, typically I don't get asked. And when I am asked for help, there's never a defined time. And I can't get into anything while I'm waiting. And so often, so much time will pass, the day is gone, nothing ends up happening at all. So I've been on call all day for nothing. And I don't want to think that's intentional. But the only other solution to this, if not scheduling, then is to repeatedly check in if it's time to start working on this thing, and that created an argument. If I sit here and wait and do nothing, then I will be as lazy as you say I am. I really will be going nowhere. But it's tons of stuff like this, and I don't know how to fix any of it. But I need to try to figure out how to fix it, not only because they're family, not only because on some level, I'd like to try to do the right thing. I don't think my emotions are especially pure. I have a lot of negative emotions in me. But maybe primarily because I owe. And debt is important to me. I'm not going to feel relieved until my debt has been repaid. And I don't know how to repay a debt someone doesn't want you to be able to repay. But we'll cut it there. That about wraps up everything. Speaking of debt, I pay you anxiety, perspective, and strategies, and you pay me listening to me bitch and moan. I'm really afraid of the person I'll come out of all this as. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.